The Orioles added a whole lot to the team this offseason, trying to rebound from what happened in 2025. But what do the projections say about all that? We'll get to that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, March 5th, 2026, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, joined by a special guest on today's episode. He is the creator and founder, and I think sole person behind it for now, of birdlandmetrics.com. That is Zach Alexander. And Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Connor. Thanks so much for having me on.
So I saw you start this site, I guess, late last month. It's been up for a couple of weeks now, Birdland Metrics. And I was excited because I feel a little bad about myself at the end of each year when Fangraphs does their version of the Spotify Wrapped. And I go on there and I realize that there's probably more important websites for my life that I could be visiting as much as I visit Fangraphs. And yet there were some wild names on there that I was the leader in the whole country for visiting their page more than anyone else. There was some definite AA relief prospects in the Orioles system that I was on the Fangraphs page for anyone else. So I love that there is, now that you've created, an Orioles specific site to go and look at projections. And as listeners and viewers of this show have known over the past 6+ years I've been doing this, I try to have a more data skewed angle when I host this podcast. And I think this could be another good thing for fans who like to look at baseball that way, to check out Birdland Metrics. So Zach, I'll give you the mini floor first and just the quick elevator pitch of what is birdlandmetrics.com and what made you want to start a site.
Yeah. So again, just wanted to say thanks again, Connor, for having me on. I think ultimately, your data-centric viewpoints on the Orioles has really kind of been regular in my podcast queue as I go to work every day. So it's exciting to be here. I think ultimately Birdland Metrics is basically what you mentioned there. It's an Orioles first analytics site. And we're going to do some exciting things on the site over time. It's a very new concept at this point in time, but the first pieces of it are building out projections for playoff odds and how we feel like the AL East is going to stack up over the course of the 2026 season. But there's a lot of exciting things in the future that I hope to do with it. I will kind of back up and say that first and foremost, the reason why I wanted to create it is I'm a lifelong Orioles fan. I've always loved the Orioles. My dad has been a huge inspiration to me. He grew up watching the great teams of the 60s and 70s and 80s and the Earl Weaver years. And he went to the first game at Camden Yards in '92. And then, we would go to a lot of baseball games together. And I sat along the first base line and eat peanuts in all weather with him. So it's a lot of fond memories out at the yard and try to get back when I can these days. So right now in my career, I've been able to develop more of a data science lens to the work that I do. And as I was kind of really looking at baseball data, which I find is a really good, kind of passion of mine here, I felt that the Orioles narrative was a bit lacking in this space. And we're a smaller market team. Some of the bigger national analytics sites, you mentioned Fangraphs is a huge one there. They do a great job and they cover a lot of different teams or actually the full gamut of teams. But there wasn't something specific to the Orioles. And I thought because there's so much publicly available data, why not try to do some deep dives, look at things from just an Oriole lens. And that's what the site is. So if folks are interested, feel free to go over to birdlandmetrics.com and check out all the different pieces there to kind of explore.
And I have to imagine this isn't something that came into your brain 3 weeks ago and that existed a week later. How long has this been, sitting around up there? What was the push to get it started? Was it more time, a push from someone else, just an inspiration one day that made it truly happen?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think ultimately I've been kind of tracking the team for a few years. I built out a preliminary model last year and tried to watch it over the course of the entire season. And I kind of really projected it more as like a games back from the last place in the wild card over time. And I was hoping, I was too optimistic that maybe the Orioles would catch back up by the end of the year. But it was one of those things that was just fun to me. And I was like, well, you know what? If this is exciting to me, maybe there's other people out there in the Orioles community that would want to kind of take part in the conversation. And so that's kind of the inspiration there. And I thought this season is a really tremendous opportunity to kind of have that discussion, because I think the AL East is really wide open, and the Orioles have had such a great offseason that it could be a really exciting playoff chase this year.
Absolutely. I already know there are people excited to read the site and check it out. If you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, just throwing up a screenshot from the homepage of the site and what you kind of see at first when you jump onto birdlandmetrics.com, and kind of starting with the projected win total for the Orioles, which currently sits at 81. And I know you've written about already that this is going to change as there's more data from this actual season and games that realistically count, now 3 weeks from now on opening day start to be played. But I think the first big question that goes into what's behind this site, Zach, is probably how does this differ from other projection systems we're looking at? Pacoda, Fangraphs projections are two of the big ones that people are looking at. Definitely have even if it's not a lot higher, have a higher projection than 81 wins right now. So what goes into the recipe to spit out what is on your site?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll kind of say too, with Fangraphs specifically, and some of these more player specific projections, they roll up their player projections into a team projection. So a lot of what we see on Fangraphs side when they're predicting, I think right now the Orioles are about 84 wins for them. So slight difference, not too, but as we can see, that could be a big shift in playoff odds going forward. But they take and they assess individual player talent, and then they roll that up into what an expected team performance is based on that player talent. What this model is doing is something inherently different. So we're actually looking at historical data. We're using RetroSheet openly available data that dates back to 1871. It's over 230,000 baseball games. And we assign an ELO point system value to each team and kind of roll that over the course of history. And then from that point in time, we're able to kind of daily run 10,000 simulations of what the 2026 season is expected to play out to be. So from each team's ELO point system, there's then a projection of what the expected win will be, or the win percentage will be for any particular game. And then from that point in time, we also are kind of layering in the preseason some of Fangraphs WAR projections to kind of make sure that we're accounting for those big offseason acquisitions that we made with the Orioles. Because one thing about this ELO system, especially in the beginning, and the reason why we're at 81 right now for the projection on Birdland Metrics, is that we're kind of slightly undervaluing what we will probably be performing in 2026 based on the 2025 performance. So, it's something, as you mentioned, it's going to really kind of pick up steam, and the model will really kind of course correct over time. And I think that's the power of the ELO model, is that, by the midpoint of the year, it's really going to be, layering in most of the actual stats and information from the season, which would be good.
It'll be interesting to keep up with. It'll be a fun site to be able to, and I think you've built it well, not just from the data analytics side, but from the I want to go click on that this morning side, because as real games start to happen, that 81 number is going to shift. It's not going to stay like that throughout the entire season. Now, maybe not as much in April and May, but if the Orioles are in this thing in August and September, it's going to be a place where people are going to want to, at the very least, give you some site traffic at 8 a.m. when they just want to go see where did that projection go from here to now. But Zach, we'll continue chatting about kind of what's going on over at the site in just a moment when we come back. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by MLB The Show 26, the latest from the beloved video game franchise. Each week on this show, we're going to highlight the stars of MLB's top 100 players list, the elite names you'll be controlling, building around, and going head-to-head with MLB The Show. Let's spotlight Kyle Bradish, ranked number 86 in the MLB Top 100. Now, you've probably seen Bradish pitch a little bit so far in this spring. The best thing we've been looking for is health from Bradish, coming off missing most of the last 2 seasons after elbow surgery. The stuff looks good. The command looks good. The velo looks good. That's what makes him elite. And if you're an Orioles fan, Bradish is kind of the guy that you're going to build your franchise around, at least from the rotation perspective. And in the show, you can do exactly that. So that's this week's MLB Top 100 highlight presented by MLB The Show 26, where you can play, manage, and build with your favorite players and teams. If you love talking baseball, you'll love even playing it more. Visit MLBThe.show/locked on and use code locked on to unlock a pack for use in Diamond Dynasty. Internet connection required. Pre-order now. Available March 17th on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series S and X, and Nintendo Switch, and it's rated E for everyone. And this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. MLB opening day is almost here, and you can feel it. We're 3 weeks away. Fresh starts, big expectations, and that first crack of the bat. Whether it's a breakout rookie or a division race that goes down to the wire and you're maybe checking the projections over at Birdland Metrics, there's nothing like being in the ballpark for it. The only problem, getting tickets can feel like a grind. Long queues, surprise fees, and prices jumping at checkout. That's where Game Time comes in. The app gives fans the advantage with constant innovation. It's how you unlock amazing tickets and experiences in just a few taps. And the app is so simple and easy to use. The Game Time guarantee means you get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. And the best part for me, fees are included in the price you see. So what you see is what you pay, period. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. So we are joined on this episode by Zach Alexander of birdlandmetrics.com. Zach, we've been talking about, what kind of led you to create this site to follow the Orioles from an analytical bend. We talked about the, win total and projection system and how it differs from others that are around the web that you can find. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the individual players and how they factor in versus the team performance that you mentioned a little bit, because you already had a piece up on the site talking about how, and you mentioned at the top, that because the Orioles brought in so many veteran players this offseason, even though they are veteran players who have produced really, really well so far in their careers, because they're all over 30 years old and might be hitting at least the back end of the aging curve. I don't think many of them are at the bottom of it, but maybe on the way down rather than the way up, that's really knocking the team in terms of projections. And there were some WAR projections you had there that were pretty small for some of these guys. So how does that factor in, and how could it change if, Pete Alonso hits 5 homers in April?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And so the player projection system that we have up on birdlandmetrics.com is very different than the team projection system right now. It's a much simpler player projection system than what Fangraphs and others are out there. I wanted to keep it simple, to keep it transparent, and I think ultimately it hopefully would kind of develop more of a conversation with folks in the community that are into this type of content. But the gist of the projection system works on a 3-year weighted average. So we kind of take the data from each individual player from the past 3 years, weight it based on recency. So last year's is more important than the previous year, more important than the year before that. And we look at a lot of for hitters, the rate stats that you'd think of: batting average, slugging percentage, all those. Full list is in the article on the site. And then we do a unique blend of StatCast layer data that we layer in exit velocity and barrel rate and hard hit rate. Because the theory is that, if a guy is hitting the ball harder than the stats suggest, then likely they're going to have better results in the future. So we're kind of accounting for that in some of the hitting stats there. Pitchers, similarly, I think some of the stats that we layer onto these weighted averages are the typical ERA, FIP, WHIP. A lot of them are, again, up on the site. And then we have minimum thresholds, right, for looking back over those 3 years. Each individual player, we're fully trusting of their stats when they've hit 500 plate appearances for hitters, and then it's 150 innings pitched for pitchers. And if they don't hit those, then they kind of hedge those projections back towards the league average. So, as you mentioned, Connor, these are also dynamic projections that are going to kind of play out over the course of the season. And I think the fun part of it that you mentioned there was that, over time, we're going to kind of get a sense of the 2026 stats for each individual player. And then that's going to kind of adjust the projections where we're kind of be reading in more of the actual stats there. And then finally, last thing I'll say about the age curves is that we do have an age curve layered into the projections for both pitchers and hitters. Hitters, we've seen tend to peak around the age 25, 27. Pitchers around 25 to 26 years old. So there are small yearly adjustments from those, and so we kind of factor those into the mix there. But we're hoping. I was looking at Pete Alonso's stats, for instance, right, and I think he's been such a reliable hitter. I do think that the age curve that we have right now might be a little bit harsh, to be honest, on the site. So I'm hoping, as an Orioles fan, that will be course corrected over the course of the season when the 2026 stats come in. But if you look at the player benchmarks page, I think it's a better representative sample of that. We have 3 benchmarks set up for 10 players on the site, and I kind of think of them as some of the core players. And those benchmarks are really kind of based on the initial start of the season projections, and then from there, we'll kind of get a sense from that if the whole core is reaching those benchmarks over the course of the 2026 season. So hopefully it'll be an exciting thing to follow on the site, and generate some good conversation there.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about the benchmarks next. You have the core players. I think that's an important thing because this has been talked about a lot. One of my favorite fellow Orioles analysts and podcasters, John Mioli, continues to talk about that. Like, Shane Baz, great. Pete Alonso, great. Taylor Ward, great. But the Orioles are not going to reach where they want unless guys like Adley Rutschman and others get back to where they need them to be this year. That's probably going to be more important than guys like Pete Alonso hitting 35 homers, which is still going to be important for this team. So you have it kind of listed under these guys: Cowser, Henderson, Holiday, Alonso, Bradish. It's the guys who you would think are the core players on this team. For example, Adley Rutschman, you have, the 2025 91 WRC plus projected 107, and then the benchmark to hit is 115. Where do those benchmark numbers come from in terms of, making the system or the model feel more comfortable that, okay, if Adley does this, not just him, but the Orioles will be in a better position?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think ultimately over time, I really want to take the player projection model and layer it into the team projection model, because I think that'll be a really fascinating thing to do. And hopefully that might be a next year project. But currently right now, those benchmarks that we've set, I kind of just set a default value in terms of plus minus from that early year projection to kind of say, hey, well, if Adley's projected to have a 107 WRC plus, I think ultimately, we're going to have a much more successful season if he's over 115. It's not too far of a stretch to say. And same with, I think more importantly, on base percentage, getting up to 340 and back to what he was in previous years and things like that will be really, really the big impact there. So, Cowser's strikeout rate, he's got to, really decrease. He struggled a lot last year with that. And then Gunnar kind of getting back to that MVP caliber status, will be really, really huge for us too. So I think a lot of it, when we were kind of looking at the projections here, then kind of inform the benchmarks. But I think over time, we'll kind of make some adjustments to that to make them a little bit more set in what the team performance then could ultimately be played out on.
You can answer this either from your personal opinion or from the model itself, or a little bit of both. How much does anything that happens in spring training, stats, velocity bumps, different shapes, new pitches, their best shape of their life, they put on 15 pounds of muscle, how much does any of that impact this, whether it's just for you personally watching the games or for what goes into the model?
No, it's a great point. I mean, so there's really no impact in the models, projections for individual players or for the team. A lot of the research suggests that spring training data is just too noisy. There's just small sample sizes. It's kind of all over the place. So we don't really put a lot of weight into it. I did kind of do a little bit of research into, what are some of these like R square values or correlations between certain metrics that kind of feed from spring training into regular season that could be somewhat predictive. And there were a few. I think, you mentioned a lot of them in terms of, pitch velocity, exit velocity for batters, strikeout rate changes and walk rate changes, but they're still not very predictive. So ultimately, I think the biggest one was pitch velocity, or the one that had the most, correlation with what, could transpire in the regular season. And it was interesting to see, unfortunately, with the news today of Andrew Kittredge, he had such a really small outing. So again, it was like one of those things where it's like, we can't really report on, whether or not the velo is down, but that it actually was kind of telling, because they did end up having an injury. So some of it can be telling, but I think a lot of it ultimately, I don't really put into the projections or models, because we kind of really just want to wait to see how the regular season plays out. And that's why we're also really careful about the projections early in the season, right? We want to make sure that we're accumulating enough data to actually feel confident about how that's getting layered in. And so it's one of those things we always kind of keep an eye on when we're looking at these things.
Yeah, the Kitchers thing was hard because especially for a veteran pitcher who's about to be 36. I was listening to Trevor May talk about this the other day. He's like, some guys have been in so many spring trainings that they're just kind of lobbing it in there in that first outing just to make sure their arm is working. And it was his first outing. And I was just like, yeah, he's 92 and not his usual 95, but it's February. This is fine. Right. Turns out it wasn't fine. You just kind of never know when you watch him in these spring training outings. We will be back with Zach to talk about kind of the final thing today, which is, okay, which players in terms of the variance of their projections will impact the Orioles the most this season? But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by TurboTax. It's tax time. For a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes, it's a lot. You're trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient. You're sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers. You're emailing back and forth and wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve, while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. Head to TurboTax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment today. And this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. College basketball is nonstop. I think there's games going on as we record right here on Wednesday. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board, especially right now during the best time of the year. It's conference tournament season. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can mix whatever conferences, whatever teams you may like. Just don't bet on Maryland to win, because I can promise you they probably won't. So head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Zach Alexander is with us here, the creator of BirdlandMetrics.com, a new site covering the Orioles this year. And Zach, the final thing I wanted to get to is the players that will impact the Orioles the most in 2026. And some of this could be from the projections on your site, and some of this is going to come from just what we've seen from these players over the past couple of years, because there are some guys where their performance could really have a huge impact on whether the Orioles can get back on track and get back to the postseason this year. I'm going to give you the guy who kind of sticks out to me first and is probably the easiest one, and then I'll let you with the data background dive into others. Adley Rutschman is very clearly, I think, number one on this list. The fact that he was essentially a 6-WAR player for back-to-back years in his first 2 years in the big leagues, had an amazing start to 2024, another all-star team, looked like he was on track, and then between injuries and bad performance, he's just been a bad hitter for a year and a half. And that's not the guy the Orioles took 1-1. So, Zach, he feels like the easy number one for the O's. I don't know if you feel the same way. And who would you have behind him as guys who would make the biggest case there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Adley is definitely the first guy on my list too. And it's interesting too, when looking at the age curves for hitters, he is right at peak age. So it's one of those things where it's absolutely a make or break season for him. In the sense that we know his potential, and getting back to that really kind of solid WRC plus and things that you mentioned, Connor, is really kind of top of the list for me for him. And he's also, I think Kyle Bradish even said it in spring training in a quote, that when Adley's hitting, this team is just so much better. So I think it kind of bleeds into a lot of the intangibles on the team as well. And then I think the second person on my list, again, another obvious one is Gunnar. And I think we've talked about him a little bit, Gunnar Henderson. I think ultimately took a step back in 2025. I think there were some concerns about injury that kind of came out after the season. It was interesting to see when I look back at the stats on him, that there was a lot of things that were consistent, like exit velocity on his hitting was right on par with 2024, but the barrel rate was down a fair amount, and it was I think it was at 8.5%, which is what I kind of had up there, for 2025, and I think he just wasn't squaring the ball up, and hopefully. With that return, we'll return the power and the WRC plus. It'll all kind of come into play there. And then I think we've talked about, or you and folks have talked about a lot on the show during the off season. But starting pitching is huge for us. I think we really got to get a solid, consistent run from Kyle Bradish. Now that he's back from Tommy John, and we haven't projected it around 130 innings. Hopefully he can kind of get to that point. We kind of want to have a little bit of a lower threshold for someone coming off of that injury. But, we're kind of expecting him to be, one, if not the ace on the team with Trevor Rogers. So, I think he's got the talent. It's mainly just, can he kind of deliver on it? And then the mid-rotation starter in Shane Baz, I think, there's, again, the talent is absolutely there. You had mentioned, I think, a few days ago on your podcast that, the ERA was up last year, somewhat because of the ballpark that he was pitching in. And it was just a good sign that he did pitch 166 innings last year. So hopefully he can kind of bring that consistency to the middle part of the rotation. So I think those players are the ones that I kind of would be tracking as have big impact on the team, in 2026.
Yeah, I think I'd have Boz up there just because, and I talked about this earlier this week, that we know Trevor Rogers is not going to have a sub-2 ERA. If he does it for 30 starts, just give this guy whatever blank check that he wants going into next year. It might go Scooble, then Rogers in free agency if he puts up a sub-2 ERA in 30-plus starts. We know it's going to come down. How much will it come down? That's, I think, a big question. Obviously, Bradish coming off injury, and there's going to be variance there. I just talked about how big I think Shane Baz will be. What Shane Baz are we going to get, right? We've seen one full season. He stayed healthy, which is good. He almost touched 170 innings, which is good. But the ERA was bad. The peripherals looked better because he was playing in that, minor league Mickey Mouse ballpark because he had to last year, and the ERA was much better on the road. But we know the ceiling of Shane Baz. This is a guy who was at one point, I think, the number 2 pitching prospect and maybe number 1 pitching prospect in all of baseball when he was in the minors. He's still only 26. He can be a top of the rotation guy if he puts it all together. Unfortunately, you can't check the box and say the Orioles got an ace this offseason because he hasn't done it yet. We just haven't seen it. And so if he does that, and even if you get, a 3.4 ERA Trevor Rogers and the good Kyle Bradish, you have a really, really good top 3 in your rotation if Baz can do that. Another name I'll just throw out there because at least for the first half of the season, he's going to have a big role. And then if it's really bad, maybe he won't. But is Colton Cowser. I mean, you have to get solid defense in center, we hope, but at least a league average bat. You can strike out 30% of the time and be a better than league average hitter. Colton Cowser almost did that in his rookie year. He just needs to find a way to hit something that's not a fastball, settle in, and stay healthy. And I think that'll be big for this team too. Zach, this was awesome to chat Orioles, learn about the new site. Again, let everybody know where they can find the site and also kind of what you'll have coming up as we quickly approach opening day here.
Yeah, no, thanks again, Connor. It's been a lot of fun. You can check out the site at birdlandmetrics.com. And like I've said kind of throughout, the website is going to be tracking a lot of our playoff projections and odds for the Orioles. In 2026, we're going to have these benchmark pages set up so you can kind of track some of these 10 core players that we have benchmarked. So it's going to be exciting. The stats are going to be coming in daily every morning. So it's going to update in real time and you'll get a sense of how the team's doing there. I have some exciting ideas. One of them being where I think I want to do some deep dives into some of the historical Orioles players and kind of make some comparisons to present day players. I really want to do things with win expectancy. So really kind of like, I think Connor, you had a great segment and show a few weeks ago that kind of talked about some of the highlights of 2025. The one game that stuck out to me was that Dodgers game where Jackson Holliday and the team came back in the 9th inning with 2 outs. That's kind of an unprecedented thing in terms of win expectancy at that stage of the game. So anyways, deep dives into those types of things and deeper analysis into some of the data. So if folks are interested in that content, please do, go over to the site and reach out if you'd like to kind of chat and talk about it.
Yeah, that email is zach@birdlandmetrics.com. He's got it on the site. If you feel like you want to contribute or be involved in any way, I know you kind of put out some feelers right when you open the website, and that is how we ended up here with an episode on Locked On Orioles. But Zach, thank you so much again. I do have to ask you though, just in case we don't have you on before opening day, any guest I have on in March has to give me at least an Orioles record prediction and how the season finishes. So you got to give that to me before you leave.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to win about 86 games, 87 games. And I think they're going to sneak into that last wild card spot. The AL East is going to be tough, but I think they have enough talent. And if they can kind of stay healthy and can be consistent, I think they're going to make it back to the playoffs this year. So I hope that'll be the case.
He is more confident than his own projection system currently, which is what we like to see. That is Zach Alexander from Birdland Metrics. You can check out all his stuff on birdlandmetrics.com. That'll do it for today's episode. We'll be back tomorrow to recap all the spring training action from the week. Unfortunately, we mentioned it already, but talk about the shoulder injury to Andrew Kittredge, what that means for the Orioles bullpen, and do they need to go out and make another move to add to that pen before opening day? That's on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.